That word philosophy means asking big questions. Well, asking big questions, but then looking for the big answers to the big questions. Because any smart aleck can ask big questions. But actually doing the hard work of trying to come up with the big answers to the big questions, that's the hard work of philosophy. Today, what the Athenians called philosophy, you and I have divided into two different things. We think about what the Athenians called philosophy in two different ways. About half of what the Athenians called philosophy, you and I would call philosophy. Philosophy, today we usually use this word philosophy to refer to asking big questions about abstract kind of things. Asking big questions like, how do you tell the difference between right and wrong? Or what makes something beautiful? Or what does it mean when you say that you love someone? Or how can you tell whether a sentence is true or not? For that matter, is there such a thing as truth? Is there a God? Does God exist? Asking these big types of questions. That's what you and I would think of as philosophy today. And I'm sure you know you can take courses in philosophy here at CF. You may not know we offer more courses in philosophy here at CF than at any state college in Florida and just about any community college in the United States. We have a very well-known and developed philosophy program here. 3 of our philosophy faculty members have served as the president of the Florida Association of Philosophy. And you can take courses in philosophy. You can even major in philosophy. My undergraduate major was in philosophy. That was back in the old days, but it's still possible. And where you take courses and you ask kind of questions and you train your mind in working your way through these big kinds of questions and you think about big stuff. The other half of what the Athenians called philosophy, you and I would call science. Science, asking big questions about the physical universe. Big questions like, what is air made out of? Or big questions like, how does the heart circulate blood through the body? Are big questions like, does the earth go around the sun, or does the sun go around the earth, or don't they both go around each other while they tumble through space? Asking these kind of big questions. And of course, you know, you can take courses in science here at CF, but we tend to think of these as two very different kinds of things. You take philosophy classes over here in Building 8, and you take science classes all the way over there in Building 2, and like they're two completely different things. For the Athenians, it's all just one big thing, asking big questions. But before we go very far talking about Athenian philosophy, we have to talk about Athenian religion. Because I'm going to be making an argument to you that not only does what you and I call science and philosophy develop in ancient Athens, but there's a religious reason why, in one sense at least, it has to. I mean, the religious framework is what's driving the creation of philosophy and science, what you and I would call philosophy and science. The idea that philosophy and science, as you and I recognize philosophy and science develops in ancient Athens, isn't terribly controversial, okay? But I'm going to be presenting you with the idea that you really have to understand Athenian religion to make sense out of Athenian science and philosophy. And so we really need to start with Athenian religion. We can describe Athenian religion as another example of a religious system we found all around the world, polytheism. We talked about polytheism when we talked about ancient Sumer and ancient Egypt. Now we're talking about polytheism one more time when we talk about ancient Athens. Polytheism, a belief in many gods. Although you remember my hesitation about using that word there, it may not be the best word, but we're kind of stuck with it. We're going to use it, but it just might not be the best way of thinking about it. Okay. If we wanted to diagram Athenian polytheism, we would start off just like we did with Sumerian polytheism, with the people down here in this physical universe that you and I live in, this physical world that you and I live in, that we experience with our bodies, that we taste, touch, see, smell, and hear, that we experience with our 5 senses, that we interact with bodily. Up above this physical universe, in some kind of spiritual atmosphere up here, floating around somewhere up there, live the gods. But again, this word God just may not be the best word to use here. What I just simply mean by that is that in English, that word God implies an awful lot of things that just might not fit. Well, here's an example of what I mean. I'm going to tell you my favorite story that comes out of Greek mythology. It's not the most famous, but it's my favorite. It's a story about two of the gods. One of the gods is named Zeus. Zeus is the boss of the gods. He's the chief of the gods. He's the father of most of them. That's one. The other god in the story is Hera. Hera is Zeus's wife. The Zeus and Hera story. Well, one day Zeus and Hera are up in their spirit house on top of Mount Olympus. And like I said with the Sumerian gods, living on mountains is pretty typical for gods. The Greek gods lived on mountains too. And Zeus and Hera are in their spirit house. And very typical of the Zeus and Hera story, they're having a big fight. If you ever come across a Zeus and Hera story, they're having a big fight. Usually they're fighting about their kids. None of their kids have turned out to be any good. Today they're fighting about their daughter, Aphrodite. Aphrodite sleeps with everything that moves. And, it's a nasty fight. This is a Zeus and Hera fight. I have to go ahead and tell you, Zeus and Hera fights are always nasty. Man, they're nasty. Zeus and Hera, they're stomping around their spirit house. They're kicking over the spiritual furniture, slinging plates of spiritual food at the wall, calling each other all kinds of horrible names. I mean, this is just, it's just nasty. Hera says to Zeus, well, if you hadn't been charging around the universe, throwing lightning bolts at people and spending more time at home with the kids, maybe our kids wouldn't be such wrecks. And Zeus says to Hera, well, if you hadn't been cheating on me every time I left town, maybe our daughter wouldn't be such a slut. I mean, it's this nasty, nasty fight. And right in the middle of this fight, Zeus's house starts filling up with smoke. And it's kind of a nasty kind of smoke. About half the smoke smell is barbecue smoke smell. Now, before we go any further, barbecue smoke smell is one of the best smells in the world outside in small doses, right? That's why you don't grill in your house. Okay, that'd be nasty. All right, outside in small doses, all right, but past that, no. The other half of the smell is like somebody went through the perfume aisle at Walmart with a baseball bat and broke all the bottles of perfume at once. Kind of a stinky kind of stinky smell. Kind of a sweet, stinky kind of smell. Now, again, a little bit of perfume is just fine in my book. Okay, we're not talking about the whole bottle. All right? All of a sudden, Zeus's house starts filling up with smoke. And Zeus goes over to the spiritual window and opens up the window, lets some fresh air in. And he looks down in the valley, and he says, oh no, I knew it. Them again. Those darn people. They've got some problem. So they've come to the bottom of Mount Olympus, and they've built an altar to Zeus. And they've taken an animal, and they've sacrificed the animal. That means they slaughtered the animal, they butchered the animal, then set the animal's body on fire. If you haven't caught on yet, that's that barbecue smoke smell. And then they're burning incense to him. That's that perfume smell. And because they're praying to Zeus, all the smoke's going up the side of the mountain into his house. The problem is it stinks. And Zeus looks down at the people in the valley, and the people are looking up at him. Oh, Zeus, come and help us. We have a big problem. Come and help us. Oh, we need your help so bad. Zeus, come help us. And Zeus turns to Hera, and he says, I wish these people would go away and leave me alone. Why do they always bother me with their little problems? Every time they get themselves in some little problem, they got to come down here, holler up at me, blow their stinky smoke up at me, and then they expect me to come down there and sort out their problems. What do they expect me to do? What do they expect from me? Zeus says. I can't even keep my kids straight. I got marital problems. And they're going to expect me to come down and sort out all their... I got enough problems on my own. I wish these people would go away and leave me alone. Maybe you start to see what I mean when I say that the use of the word God here just may be misleading. That idea of God in English, personality that runs the whole universe, that idea that enters into Western culture through the Hebrew and Christian traditions, we'll catch up with those traditions when we do. Okay, if you haven't caught on yet, this is not what God tells Moses on Mount Sinai. Go tell the children of Israel to leave me alone. I have too many problems. It's a whole other system. It's a whole other thing. Okay. And just why the word just might be misleading, okay? And in fact, the more that you look at Greek religion, Athenian religion, the more different it looks from ancient Sumer and ancient Egypt. If you wanted one word to describe the Sumerian gods, what would it be? Mean. Remember, the Sumerian gods, man, they're mean. If you wanted one word to describe the Athenian gods, well, it might be stupid, or foolish, or messed up. I know that's two words. Or not so important. I know that's three words. But they're foolish. They're foolish. Aphrodite makes an awful lot of foolish decisions in her love life. Zeus and Hera, they make an awful lot of foolish decisions. In fact, that's the plot line of the Greek god stories. You give a god a decision to make, the god will make the wrong decision every time. They're foolish. They spend most of their lives depressed because their lives are all messed up. And why are their lives all messed up? Because they made foolish decisions. And they're not so important. Now, I'm not saying they aren't important. I'm just saying they're not as important as they are in Sumer or Egypt. Now, the stories about the gods are important. Stories are important because the stories about the gods, parents tell children stories about the gods to teach them moral values. But this is very interesting, and I think it's unique among world religions as far as I can tell. Parents tell their children stories about the gods to teach them moral values by using the gods as bad examples. The gods are bad examples in the stories. Little James comes home from school with a bad note safety pinned to the back of his shirt. Does your teachers ever safety pin bad notes to the back of your shirts? Mine always did. I was a bad kid. My mom never had to buy safety pins as teachers kept sending her home plenty with bad notes. In fact, my mom still uses the safety pins from all my bad notes. I was a bad kid. Oh boy. Okay. Sit down. And Daddy Mommy says, okay, let me tell you a story. Here's a story about Apollo. Apollo is one of the gods. And at the end of the story, Mommy or Daddy says, now, do you see how Apollo made a mess out of everything? Do you see how what you kind of did at school is kind of like what Apollo did? You don't want to end up like Apollo did, do you? You see what a mess Apollo made out of everything? Well, then let me tell you, the next time you think about doing something like that, you think about what happened to Apollo. Apollo is the bad example in the stories. I mean, all the gods are bad examples. And they're not so important. But I think the more you look at Greek religion, it becomes apparent that the gods really aren't all that important. And that's because there's something else, which is maybe the best way to put it. Up above this physical universe that you and I live in, up above this physical universe you and I live in, that we experience with our bodies, up above whatever kind of spiritual environment the gods float around up. What am I trying to say? The gods float around up there, okay? In some kind of spiritual environment or atmosphere or something. Way up above, even where the gods live, is something else. What the Greeks call the theos thing. Theos or theos. It's just two different ways of pronouncing the Greek words here, and they're both okay. It's just there's two standardized pronunciations, so it pretty much depends on where you learn Greek. Okay, theos or theos, they're both okay. The theos thing. Now, this Greek word theos is usually translated by the English word God with a capital G to distinguish the capital G theos thing up here. Come on, wake up. There we go. Okay, let's try it again. This word theos up here is usually translated by the English word God, usually with a capital G, to distinguish this theos up here from the small g gods down here like Zeus and Hera and Apollo and Aphrodite and all those others. But I don't think that's an accurate translation of that Greek word theos here, in this context at least. Again, that just has to do with what the word means in English. That word, the word God in English, again, means personality that runs the whole universe. Again, by personality, I don't mean a human being. But I mean all the things we think about with personality, personhood, the ability to reason, to have emotions, to um, communicate, to make moral decisions, and so on. Personality that runs the whole universe. Now, the theos thing definitely runs the whole universe. That's not the problem. Zeus, you see, he doesn't run the whole universe. Zeus can't even run his own family. Zeus can't manage a candy stand, okay? This fool can't run anything, or certainly not the universe. The theos thing definitely runs the whole universe. But there's no sense of personality here. There's no sense of personality involved with the theos thing. It never dawned on anyone in ancient Athens to pray to the theos thing. I mean, why would you? There's no personality involved. If we want to understand this word theos maybe a little bit better, we might use, here we go, we might think of the theos thing as the rules of the universe, or maybe the pattern of the universe. The rules or pattern of the universe. Pattern is a very Athenian way of thinking about the theos. You've noticed by this point in your life that the universe, the physical universe, tends to follow a general pattern. If I hold my jump drive out like this and let go of it, we have a good idea of what's going to happen, because generally when we hold things out and let go of them, they fall. There's a pattern there. There are a number of patterns in the universe. It's always day and then night, day and then night, day and then night. It's always spring, summer, autumn, winter, spring, summer, autumn, winter. Unless you live in Central Florida. When it's winter, spring, winter, spring, winter, spring, winter, spring, 3 or 4 months. But if you live someplace normal, there's a pattern to the seasons. Okay. Children are born young and they grow old and they die. Children are born young and they grow old. They're born young and they grow old. There seems to be a pattern to the physical universe. Also up there, to use some more religious metaphor, sometimes considered a part of the theos thing, sometimes considered something separate. The relationship never really clearly defined. What the Greeks call the logos thing. Logos or logos, they're both okay pronunciations of the Greek word here, logos or logos. Now, if we wanted to translate this Greek word logos into English, we'd have our choice of 2 English words, because the Greek word logos means 2 different things in English at the same time. We could use the English word thought, or we could use the English word word. There we go. We can use the English word thought or the English word word, because that Greek word logos means thoughts that can be expressed in words. And so depending on the sentence, they're either the thoughts that are in the mind or the words that are being used to express those thoughts. The logos, thoughts that can be expressed in words, or in other words, rational thought, thoughts that can be expressed in words. Now, are you with me so far? Are you almost with me so far? I always get more nods with almost with me. If you're almost with me, you're really with me. It's just you don't have the courage yet to admit it. But you're almost with me. If you're with me, you're with me. You're with me. Okay? Because here comes the kicker. These people believe, and all we're doing is outlining religious belief. Get used to it. We did it with Sumer in Egypt, and we're not finished yet. But these people believe that every human being has inside their head a little piece of that divine sacred logos, their mind, the ability to reason and to express those thoughts in words. That everybody has a little piece, that divine, sacred, holy logos thing that's up there, they've got a little piece of it inside their head. It's what Socrates called the divine spark. We'll get to Socrates, I think, next week. Calls the logos thing the divine spark inside every human being. Every human being, and the gods too, for that matter, have inside their head a little piece of that divine, sacred logos thing, the mind, the ability to think and to express those thoughts in words. And now the whole point of the religion, once we move past the stories about the gods and all that kind of stuff, the way the religion works is that you're supposed to exercise a little piece of logos inside your head and make it strong, and then to reach up using a whole lot of religious metaphor here, to reach up, almost like a magnet pulling itself up to a big piece of metal, or almost like an old-fashioned dial-up modem connection or somehow. And then that little piece of logos inside your head to get connected to religious metaphor stuff, to get connected to the big logos up there, to get plugged in, to get reconnected, they would actually say, to be reunited with that logos thing up there. And then when this kind of mystical connection is made, then to see, to experience, to encounter the theos thing. To, in some mystical kind of way, experience the rules, the pattern of the universe. To see the whole pattern of the universe before you. And why would you want to do such a thing? Well, for one thing, some of those rules might be useful. For example, one rule of the physical universe, which might come in useful under certain contexts, is that if I go to a 500-foot cliff and jump off, I will at least get hurt. Well, that's a good rule to keep in mind. Okay. Under certain contexts, it might be very important to keep in mind. So some of these rules might be good to know. But there might be other rules out there too. There might be other rules that a lot of people don't think about. There might be other rules that nobody else knows about. For example, there's another rule of the physical universe out there that says that if I go to a 500-foot cliff and jump off with a hang glider strapped to my back, then I can fly. And flying's pretty cool. Flying's like magic. Maybe there's all kinds of rules out there that other people don't know about, that if you found out what they were, it'd be like you had magic. You could do all kinds of things. It would be a lot like magic. And now maybe you start to see why you really have to have this background in religion of Athens to make sense out of the philosophy of Athens. Because when you think about it, when you take away the religious language, let's get rid of the gods, all this theos logos thing. If we get rid of the religious language here, what have we really been talking about in the last few minutes but what most people would think of as science? What's science? Well, you use your mind and you figure out the rules of the physical universe. I guess that's what science is. At a later point in the semester, I'll be giving you a very short lecture on the development of modern science. And at that point, I wouldn't have to make a big argument to you that modern science has been kind of important in the development of Western culture. And in fact, I'll be making an argument to you that in a lot of ways, modern science has become the dominant religion of Western culture. Or it works like a religion. It has kind of an unquestioned authority, where nobody questions the scientific method. Nobody questions science itself. They might disagree about what scientists say. They might disagree about scientific theories, but nobody questions science. Nobody questions this unquestionable thing. And it's the way that you use your mind to figure out the rules of the universe. Well, we're not quite there yet. We'll get there later in the semester. But when we do, I want you to think back to this discussion because it shouldn't surprise us that science ends up having almost a religious power because it comes out of a religious system. And so that shouldn't surprise us. And so now that we have this background in Athenian religion, we're ready to, once the computer wakes up, move on and talk about philosophy. Did I tell you this? When I was a kid, people always told me technology would make my life faster. I think I told you that, didn't I? Yeah. It ended up, I spent half my life, I think. I spent half my life waiting on my wife, and the other half waiting on technology. Don't tell her I said that. Now we're ready to start talking about philosophy. Philosophy. Actually, that word philosophy comes from the Greek language. Literally, it means the love of wisdom. Philos means to love someone like a family member. Sophos means wisdom, the love of wisdom, to ask big questions and then to look for the big answers. And we're going to start off our discussion of Athenian philosophy with a group of philosophers called the pre-Socratics, or just the pre-Socratic philosophers. The pre-Socratics are called the pre-Socratics because they come before a man named Socrates. And we're going to be talking about Socrates at a later point very soon. The first pre-Socratic, let me back up a sentence. I'm going to give you a list of pre-Socratic philosophers here. They're the big names, just so you know what the big names are, and then so you get some kind of taste for the types of questions that the pre-Socratic philosophers are asking. I'm going to start off the discussion with a man who's sometimes called the first philosopher or the first scientist, and that's a guy named Thales. I mean, obviously he's not the first philosopher, but he gets that honorary title because he's the first person who writes a book that you and I would recognize as a work of science or philosophy. The big question that Thales wants an answer to. Thales wants an answer to the question, what is the physical world made out of? What is stuff in the physical universe made out of? Thales begins a group of philosophers called the materialists. They're called the materialists because they want to know the answer to the question, what is the physical world made out of? The material the physical world is made out of. What's the matter that the physical universe is made out of? Thales himself comes to the conclusion that everything in the universe is made out of one thing, one substance, what Thales calls water. Now, there's a subtle point here that might help some of you. If some of you don't quite catch it, it's really not a big deal, okay? But think about this for a second. Thales says everything in the universe is made out of one substance. So if there's only one, he can call it whatever he wants to. He can call it water, he can call it concrete, he can call it plastic, he can make up a word for it. Because everything's made out of one. So it doesn't matter what you call the one. But Thales calls this one substance water, because that's his entry point to explaining what he means when he says that everything in the universe is a form of the same substance. If Thales were here today, he might say to you something like this. He might say, you know what water is made out of? It's made out of water. You know what ice is made out of? It's made out of water. You know that steam is made out of water. You know that snow is made out of water. If you've been on top of a mountain, you know the clouds are made out of water. All these different things are different. They have different textures. They have different temperatures. They're all different, and yet you know that they're all made out of water, the same thing. Well, in that same way, everything else in the physical universe is made out of water. Even things that don't look like they're made out of water are made out of water. Thales comes up with an experiment to demonstrate that things that don't look like they're made out of water actually are made out of water. That's why he's called the first scientist. That's what scientists do. They come up with experiments. Thales takes a young tree, and he digs up the young tree, shakes all the dirt off the roots, and he weighs the tree. And the tree weighs, let's just say, 10 pounds. It doesn't matter. I'm making up the numbers. It doesn't matter. And then he takes a bunch of dirt, and he weighs the dirt, and the dirt weighs, let's just say, 30 pounds. I'm making up the numbers. It doesn't matter. And then he takes the tree, he plants the tree in that 30 pounds of dirt in a big clay pot in his backyard, and that's the lab prep. That's it. The experiment is off. He doesn't really do anything. Oh, he keeps an eye on the tree, and maybe if it doesn't rain for a week or two, he pours some water in the pot so that it doesn't die. And maybe, I don't know, I'm making it up, 6 years go by, let's just say. The tree's grown. He comes back to the tree, he pulls the tree out of the pot, he shakes off all the dirt off the roots, he weighs the tree. Now the tree weighs, let's just say, 40 pounds. 30 pounds more than it did. And then he weighs the dirt in the pot, and the dirt weighs, guess what, same it weighed 6 years ago, 30 pounds. Well, you got 30 pounds of tree there, 30 pounds of wood there that's got to be made out of something. And what's the only thing going into the pot? Water. Trees don't look like they're made out of water. What's the only thing going into the pot? Water. It's a pretty good experiment. It follows the scientific method. You start off with a hypothesis, and you have repeatable results and all this kind of stuff. It's a pretty good experiment. And if it sounds kind of strange to you to think about wood being made out of water, I mean, sure, it doesn't look like it's made out of water. It's not all that far from what they'll tell you over in biology class. It's not all that far off the current theory. Because as it turns out, there is other stuff going into the pot besides water that I'm paying attention to. By the way, that's the big problem with the scientific method. You focus on one thing that's happening when there's, of course, millions of things going on that you're not paying attention to. Thales is focused on that water because that's what his hypothesis is about. But there's other stuff going into the pot too. What else is going into the pot? Sunlight and Air. And the current theory they'll teach you over in Building 2. It's called photosynthesis. Ring a bell? How's that work? The hydrogen from the water combines with a carbon from the carbon dioxide to form hydrocarbons. Hydrocarbons is what they call wood over in Building 2, because if they just called it wood, everybody would think they were as smart as they were. And then it gives off oxygen, and somehow sunlight does something magical with it. I mean, that's what they'll tell you, that trees are made out of water and air, and somehow sunlight has something to do with making wood. I don't buy it, but that's what they'll tell you. I mean, we're going to have an opportunity pretty soon to see. It's going to rain, probably tomorrow, okay? Well, after it rains, you go out in your backyard and look. You'll see mud puddles. There's the water. There's plenty of air. And then the clouds break through and the sunlight shines right down on the mud puddle. Is the mud puddle going to turn into wood? No. Oh! But the sunlight only does its magic thing inside plant cells. Outside plant cells, the sunlight doesn't do its magic thing. Remember that next time you're on a sunny day at the beach, is the ocean turning into wood? Don't think so. That's what they'll tell you. But the idea everything is made out of one thing is a pretty radical idea. And it may be a lot more radical than it seems at first glance. And it's not a very popular theory. And pretty quickly, the theory is going to shift. And that's going to be our starting point the next time we're together.